Welcome to the first virtual NAFB convention. Your session will begin momentarily. Before we begin this session of the first ever virtual NAFB convention, we would like to make a few acknowledgments. Thank you to BASF for sponsoring the virtual convention platform. BASF has been a sponsor of the NAFB for more than 30 years, and we appreciate their continued partnership. Did you know that by attending this session today, you'll receive points with the NAFB Virtual Convention game, brought to you by Anuvia Plant Nutrients? Be sure to check the leaderboard on the site. The top 5 participants will receive gift cards. Before we begin this session, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple of things. Be sure to use the hashtag NAFB20 on all of your social media posts. And the NAFB Foundation auction also continues online. Be sure to utilize the proxy bid system to secure your bids today. We would like to send a big thank you to Corteva for sponsoring the video production of this session. Welcome to the first virtual NAFB convention. Your session will begin momentarily. Before we begin this session of the first ever virtual NAFB convention, we would like to make a few acknowledgments. Thank you to BASF for sponsoring the virtual convention platform. BASF has been a sponsor of the NAFB for more than 30 years, and we appreciate their continued partnership. Did you know that by attending this session today, you'll receive points with the NAFB Virtual Convention game, brought to you by Anuvia Plant Nutrients? Be sure to check the leaderboard on the site. The top 5 participants will receive gift cards. Before we begin this session, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple of things. Be sure to use the hashtag NAFB20 on all of your social media posts. And the NAFB Foundation auction also continues online. Be sure to utilize the proxy bid system to secure your bids today. We would like to send a big thank you to Corteva for sponsoring the video production of this session.
I'm Sabrina Halverson, Marketing and Promotions Chair for the NAFB. I'd like to welcome you to this professional improvement session, How to Put Together a Powerful Sales Presentation, sponsored by Poet. Before we begin, a few acknowledgments. Thank you to BASF for sponsoring the virtual convention platform. BASF has been a sponsor of NAFB events for more than 30 years, and we appreciate their continued partnership. By attending this session today, you will receive points with the NAFB Virtual Convention Game, which is brought to you by Anuvia Plant Nutrients. Check out the leaderboard on the site. The top 5 people will receive gift cards. Now here's a message from our session sponsor, Poet.
At some point, every person who has ever had a big idea has been told, don't bother. Keep your head down, do your work. Know your place. At Poet, we know our place. Our place is at the forefront of history, pioneering an industry, challenging what's expected, changing the world. You want to change the world? You need more than common sense. You need uncommon vision. You want to change the world? You need more than just big ideas. You need big ambition to make them happen. You want to change the world? You need unwavering confidence. You need unrelenting passion. You need an insatiable appetite to do more, to be better. Poet is changing the world by producing clean, renewable alternatives to fossil fuels at our 28 bioprocessing facilities nationwide. We're reducing climate change and airborne toxins, improving worldwide health, providing American jobs, and reducing our dependence on foreign oil. And we aren't satisfied being the world's largest producer of biofuels. Our commitment to cutting-edge research has resulted in innovative technologies across industries and across the globe. Our entrepreneurial spirit continues to cultivate new, sustainable resources. The knowledge we've gained producing ethanol from excess starch is leading to revolutionary new technologies that turn biomass into cellulosic biofuel. We're improving livelihoods by teaching sustainable agricultural practices to farmers in developing nations and supporting quality educational programs that will inspire and empower generations to come. We're creating high-quality, high-protein, nutritious food and feed. We're improving global health with clean cooking solutions. We're replacing harmful petrochemicals and making asphalt more sustainable so that the roads we drive on are as green as the biofuels powering the vehicles we drive. Where others see insurmountable obstacles, we see unlimited opportunities, and we're just getting started. Sustainable biofuels, oil alternatives, nutrient-rich proteins, cleaner air, a brighter future. Poet.
Thank you again to Poet for your sponsorship. Before we begin the session, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple of things. Be sure to use the hashtag NAFB20 on all your social media posts. The NAFB Foundation auction also continues online. Utilize the proxy bid system to secure your bids. Finally, thank you to Corteva for sponsoring the video production of this session. Now let me introduce our speakers. Breck Von Bank has been in the advertising and radio world for 28 years, holding various positions ranging from sales assistant, local seller, national seller, network seller, VP of sales, and general manager. In her current position with the American Ag Radio Network and Adams on Agriculture Radio Network, she's the national sales manager. This is her 20th NAFB convention, and she continues to provide leadership to the association by serving on the NAFB Board of Directors for the second time. Breck's sales assistant is her dog Bogey, who doesn't get much work done during the day because he's busy sleeping on her feet. I would also like to introduce Bill Holst. After spending more than 35 years in the radio and media world, Bill continues to believe that old-school relational sales are the most effective. Bill manages an extremely large ag radio station, WNAX Radio in Yankton, South Dakota. that touches 5 states in the heartland of the country. He and his sidekick Willie travel from South Dakota to Boston and nearly every port of call in between, developing these relationships that he has found truly last a lifetime. Speak up when asking questions. We're not sure if he can't hear or if he prefers to ignore those in the audience. Please give the old guy a warm welcome.
Thanks, Sabrina, for the introduction. I am here with Bill Holtz, like she mentioned today, and Bill and I are going to be kind of going through some tips on prospecting, what to do in sales calls, kind of follow through, and kind of everything in between that he and I have done from basically A to Z. I think, like Sabrina had mentioned, collectively, we've got several combined years of experience. A lot of math for me, so I don't really know how many years there are combined between the two of us. I think it's fair to say that it's a lot. Wouldn't you agree, Bill?
I would agree. In fact, it's one of those things that you're right. We should probably not even talk about it.
That's right. Let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it. So one of the things that we were asked to do today is kind of talk about starting out. Like you literally are starting out and you're going to make a sale, or actually even before a sale, you're going to say, okay, I need to make some appointments and you need to start making some cold calls. You know, how to start out doing that? Like what's the best practices? And I think for both Bill and I, we started out back in the day before the internet when we were probably both sitting there with the phone that was plugged into the wall with the push button of the rotary and the yellow pages. Yes?
Absolutely. And when you talk about making appointments, it brings me to one that I'll never forget. I've traveled virtually the entire United States for Saga Communications. And the reason I brought Closer with me today is the dog that you see in the lap with me, Willie, is actually the reason we have a long-standing relationship with the Cats political folks. When I was on the road with the dog, I actually used the dog as an opener to get in the door at a Philly office and a large Cats conglomerate there in Philadelphia. And he put more business on the books for us that week than I think any of my salespeople have ever done. And it was because I really believe people turn to folks that they feel like they can trust. And if you walk in at my age, trust is not necessarily an opener, but Willie was. And so if you can get the attention of your prospect and get them to begin a conversation with you, I think that's key. I think it's really critical.
Right. So the moral of the story is everybody should get a dog and bring it on sales calls with you.
I don't think it's a bad idea.
I don't either. And so, you know, taking a look at where we prospect, Bill, I'm sure you and I have evolved over the years, like we talked about starting out with the yellow pages, which was always a good time. But some of the places now, and I think it depends on where you are, if you're a local seller or a national seller, but listening, if you're a local seller, I would say listening to the other radio stations in your area, watching TV shows or TV, broadcast TV that are buying in your geography in your area, and even cable, I guess, for that matter. And, looking at billboards, I think is always a good place to look. One of the places that I do prospecting now on a national level is I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. I'm going to, our competitors' websites all the time, listening to, social media. I go there, saving those programs that we get from all the trade shows, every single year from all those, like save those. They're always a good resource to go back to, and even some of the organizations that we're members of, we get the membership handbook for NAFB, of course, but other ones where there's a lot of good contact information in there. And another thing I do too is prospect by category. So if I'm in a prospect, you just say like machinery, for example, I'll kind of do prospect in the whole category for a while and make sure that, you're kind of researching that industry as a whole. So that's one of the things that I do. What about you, Bill?
I think the prospecting by category is key. I think to that, simply to add another component, and that would be to find the lighthouse in that category, meaning as we look at a region or we look at a community or a state, there's always one or two individuals, be they a bank, a dealership, it could be an elevator, and find one that stands out and then land that one by relational selling by getting to know them, finding out what their challenges are, and helping them.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that kind of leads us into how do you approach making sales calls, versus if you're doing a local call versus national. And I get that you've got a rep firm, but you still are engaged with the national calls, and you've been on national calls before with your rep firm. Like, how would you say that you differ in your process between the two?
The difference between a national call where you're dealing with, say, a CATS representative or a group that's out there representing the radio station, they're setting the stage for you. You then go in and begin to deal with the client on a one-on-one basis and finding out more about their business. But as we, on a local basis, have found that finding the customer and then not trying to pitch them right off the bat, but rather talking to them about making an application for a job with them, helping them solve whatever it is that keeps them up at night.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I mean, I think, calling making a local call, I should say, I think, yeah, it's easier because you're going to be in front of them. They're more accessible to you on a regular basis instead of getting on a plane. But I always say too, making sure that you're prepared when you go into these calls and you've done your homework. You're probably not going to be presenting something to them, but at least understand, who they are, what their role is in the industry and their category. And of course, you're going to use that to kind of do your client needs analysis and ask questions, but you need to look like you are already done a lot of your homework, like I said, and you can have a conversation with them. So you kind of get some of that out of the way. And I think it gives you the ability to ask better questions.
Absolutely. If you walk in completely ignorant of their business, it'll show up in the first 5 minutes. Whereas if what you've done is your suggestion, and that is to do the drill down on the internet, from their websites, from possibly even leaders in the community, you can ask leading questions that will, in a very short while, have them convinced that you're there to work with them long before you bring out your presentation. Right.
And I think for national calls too, I mean, certainly you need to be prepared, but I feel like it's kind of a different conversation and it's a higher level. Make sure that you are, understanding your competition and their competition too. And I feel like that's where I use more of, kind of like analytics in those types of calls too. Not that I don't or didn't on local calls, but I feel like I need to be prepared to kind of talk about those things, understanding the lingo, what it means, understanding AMR, understanding how to pull an AMR and what your PMA is, according to everybody else, and really be able to showcase that. And then too, I think, the NAFB research that we have is really an invaluable tool that's on the NAFB website that anybody can go. If you click on the More tab, I think it's the More tab, it's on the far right, the drop down, it says research, and all of the WAVE studies are on there. And the questions have evolved, I think, over the years to accommodate for different things like podcasting and stuff like that too. And aside from the research, there's some really invaluable pictures too that I think really help on a sales call at an agency. If, there's been, like, you have a new agency, for example, and maybe they haven't dealt with much ag. And so you're kind of, going through creating that life of the grower or the rancher, what have you. Those tools can be really valuable. And I don't know how frequently people use those. I have them in a lot of my presentations, not the whole thing, because it's like 50 pages. So I think you have to pick and choose who you're meeting with, which ones make the most sense. But I wouldn't overlook that as a tool either. And we all have access to it. And like I said, it's on the NAFB website.
I think that too many times when on a call, you assume that because it's in a metropolitan area, that they've not been on a farm or they don't understand ag. And so finding out where the people that you're going to be presenting to came from and what their point of reference is. And if it is a person that's maybe not necessarily real in step with agriculture, NAFB is a wonderful point to which they can turn and, as you said, get information, and we can bring them bits and pieces, but we need to wet that whistle for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And since we're kind of talking about cold calling and things, maybe this would have been better to bring up in the beginning of our discussion, but I think it's important too to not get discouraged when we cold call. And if you're starting out, you know, it can take time. I mean, you might have success with maybe making a couple phone calls to get that appointment with the first person, but on national calls, I mean, sometimes I have people that I literally have probably worked for 3 years to get that first appointment with, and with turnover and people changing, and you know that sometimes that person higher up is pretty well protected by, you know, whoever it is that you're calling and whatever. So just make sure that you stick with it, because I think they probably know, and I think there's probably math equations on this. In fact, I know there are. I just don't recall what the stats are. But you know, a certain amount of people will give up after, you know, what is it, 5, 6, 7, 8 phone calls. The person that's willing to make 50 phone calls or more is going to be the winner, at least for that, for to get an appointment. And it might take you a long time, but I'm sure we both have had experiences like that where you're like, oh my gosh, I literally have been sent. I mean, I've sent people crazy packages before to get them to like pay attention to me and just weird stuff. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
We jokingly talked about Willie and being the opener or the closer. You're absolutely right. If you can get their attention, and who knows what it's going to take. And the other thing is, I believe that there's a game that's set out long before we ever make that first call. I wonder how many times these people are going to take a no. I wonder how many times they're going to come back. And if we show that stick-to-itiveness, they go, you know, maybe I'm going to give him an audience. Or
Yeah.
her an audience.
I would agree with, I've actually had somebody tell me that years ago, that he was sort of entertained by my voicemails that I would leave him. And I think I sang to him one time, which nobody wants to hear me sing. It was in Minneapolis. I was a local seller. It was probably 25 years ago. And it worked. It's just sometimes creativity wins, and you got to do what you got to do, right? So, yeah. So when you're preparing for these meetings, Bill, like what kinds of things do you make sure that you bring with you that you would have on every single meeting?
Well, so far as WNEX is concerned, we're the largest ag station in the nation, much like your network. And we can go a lot of different directions in terms of what that client's business is. If it's implements, if it's seed, if it's fertilizer, if it's small crops, livestock, we can approach it from a lot of different angles. So if we know ahead of time, and if we don't, shame on us, we custom build our leave behind for them. But each leave behind has a lot of the same material throughout, whether it's the programs that we're doing, the personnel that we have, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too. If it's a first meeting, I think it's a little bit different, especially it depends on what types of conversations I've had prior to that first meeting. And if I'm, you know, sometimes if I'm flying somewhere to meet somebody too, I maybe haven't had the opportunity to have a real in-depth conversation with them. I mean, of course, some, because I got the meeting. But I always try to have everything available. And, you know, I do carry some paper things that I have that's kind of generic. But I usually have my iPad with me, or my laptop, which is a touch screen, so I can just readily available pull things up that, you know, are nice presentation style that we can quickly run through, whether I pull it up on a you know, whiteboard, or I open up my computer, like if we're at a coffee shop or something. And then that way I can just quickly email it to them too when we're talking about it. And then if I most likely would do something custom when I leave based on, you know, the information that I've gathered from the call, then I would, you know, follow up with them. And two, I think you and I do this when you leave an appointment, you know, always make sure that you have some type of follow-up date available. Like, I'll follow up with you next Wednesday, or if it's local, can I meet back with you next Wednesday, or what have you? Like, what types of things do you do for that when you leave a call?
I think it goes back to your point about never giving up, and we are always closing, and if we're not, shame on us. You talked about what it is that you go into a meeting with. I've gone in with anywhere from a Starbucks card to a book, possibly on the area that we represent. I've carried in paintings. It just depends on what it is that I have found through the drill down that these people are probably going to be drawn to. And arrangements of flowers, Christmas time, trays of cookies. It's all old school, but again, how do I get their attention?
Yeah.
And you're right. Get another appointment set up, and that's part of the closing process right there.
Yeah. And I think too, to kind of to your point with, be prepared and all of the things that you do, I think one of the things that I feel is most important is, making sure that you're always honest with whoever you're meeting with. And I'm not saying people aren't, but I think it's okay to say, if they ask you a question, to say you don't know the answer, because you don't want to assume and kind of make one up and then come back and say, oh, that isn't really the right answer, because you work so hard to make sure that you are, presenting yourself in the way that is honest and everything like that. And so I always just say, you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver ever. So just that relationship is so important. I think you need to make sure that you respect it, and you work so hard for it. And ultimately, I think everything that you're saying is these relationships are so important, and so you always need to remember that, because you damage it once and it could be long term.
You're going down a road that the word that pops into my head is transparency. And if you're transparent with your prospect that you're talking to, hopefully client down the road, if you're totally honest and trustworthy with them, they will gain a component in that they will turn to you and ask for, okay, what's your suggestion? Or how would you look at us doing whatever? And if you are trying to, as we say, blow smoke, it doesn't take long to figure that one out, and you're done.
Right. Let's go back to the NAFB research and how you utilize that, and how has it helped you?
I think that the NAFB research has really morphed over the years, and too many times we lose sight of the fact that there's nuggets in there that we can pull out. To be perfectly honest with you, I know that it's changed a lot since we first rolled it out up in Chicago. Maybe you could talk about what some of the latest additions have been.
Yeah, well, you are right, and I think it's every other year. So last year it was 2020, so it would have been 2016, I believe, was the first wave. I probably should have that in front of me.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so that was the first year that we did it, and there was 4 waves, and it's all, about where, farmers and ranchers go to get their news and information. And there's a lot of specific questions in there, and it's all, unduplicated audience and unaided questions. And so it's, that alone is valuable information. And when they have evolved, to answer your questions, like, they have questions in there now about kind of national news versus local, and how people view that types of news. And like we would expect, of course, it comes back to that trust factor with people's farm broadcasters and trusting the information that they get from that person that they listen to every day. I know as things have evolved, we have a lot of social media coming into play now, where we didn't, the first time that we did this. Podcasting is kind of something that we're all talking about now. So that's thrown in there. There's even some specific questions now too about like livestock, and they're getting into kind of the specifics of that if you wanted to break it out. And then of course, some of the other things that are great in the research is reinforcing what we already know. And that is that the old AM, FM, like terrestrial radio stations are where the farmers and ranchers are still going to get their news and their weather and their information, because it is the trusted source. We know that they turn it on and they leave it on. And that's some of those pictures I was referring to earlier that listeners have sent in are so great, because they show them listening. Some of them have like the old jukebox radio, where they're in their kitchen, they're in the garage, they're in the shop, they're, in the pickup truck, they're in line in the grain trucks. I mean, there are all these different places, and then you can see the different times of day too. And so they really do, they turn it on and they keep it on. And it's not like appointment type of listening where they can have it on and still be multitasking and working and listening at the same time. And we are going to be doing another wave study, but it's by a different company now. I don't even know who it is with. I know moving forward, we've decided to kind of expand our horizons in doing that.
The thing I found exciting about the different waves is that to each one that I've seen, yes, there's new things that are coming along, and they blend in so nicely with radio. And through the radio farm broadcaster, there's a relationship that's been established with the listener. And that
Right.
relationship goes back to the trust component, which is all the way back to the old school that we started with.
Right, right. What else can you think of that we should talk about sales calls that we haven't already touched on?
Make more of them.
That is also true.
What
Yes.
did you expect from me?
I don't
Nothing.
know what I expected you to say, but you are right, because right, I mean, it's kind of a numbers game. The more calls you make, the more sales you're going to make, right?
Well, absolutely. And I can't tell you how many salespeople have strolled in at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon and have a look on their face like I'm done. And at the end of the day, it's how ambitious are you? Because it is a numbers game.
Yeah. One of the places that I worked earlier in my career, we had a banner made up in our conference room, and it said something like, when you think you're done for the day, make one more sales call.
Thank you.
And then you could add upon that. But in like looking at it in like baby steps, that's like 5 more calls a week times 52. Again, that's a lot of math for me, but 1 more call a day, it's pretty simple.
And go back to your closing ratios. It just determines how bad you want to do it. And those of us that stick to it and stay with it have found a very satisfying and financially sound career.
Yes, I would agree. Those closing ratios are important to know where you're at with those. Absolutely. So,
I mean, to me, it's so basic, and yet it's so hard for many, many people to wrap their arms around the fact that they're going to take rejection, call after call after call, until they finally make a home run. And once they develop that, the adrenaline rush that they get from closing a deal will push them into the next 2 or 3 calls. I've got a fellow right now that started out literally when he was 10 years old doing color for his dad on Division I sports. And at 10 years of age, he was such a sports enthusiast. Nobody in the audience knew how young he was. Well, he's in his mid-50s now and starting in the sales game. I wished I had 2 more of him. But he loves radio and he loves what we do. And I'm convinced that 2-3 years from now, he's going to wonder why he didn't do it sooner. And if you're looking at this game and thinking, can I make a career out of it? Absolutely. And I love the expression that goes something like this: simple it is, easy it ain't. But anything that's worthwhile is worth working for.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, just definitely being consistent with what you do. And I mean, you just kind of got to be true to yourself. I mean, if you don't make sales, you don't make money, right? So there's no bluffing your way through this if you're getting paid on commission like most of us are. But I think you absolutely can make a career out of it. And you and I have. And I think, just to your point, I mean, it's going to be hard. I mean, look at the year that we're all living in right now. I mean, there are times where it's not hard, or it's not easy at all. It's hard. And I think we even all go through phases where you might get in a rut and you get discouraged. I think if you stick it out and keep just doing what you're doing, you got to be consistent. I think you can make a career out of it for sure. And I think too, right now, that I think we need to be aware of what's changing in our world, because it's not just about radio anymore. And I know that we're the National Association of Farm Broadcasters, but there's so much more to it that's going on right now. And, look at how things have evolved from when you started a million years ago to when I started 28 years ago to 20 years ago to 10 years ago to even 5 to now. What does 5 years from now even look like with the impact of everything else that's happening in our world? I mean, we got to know so many more things. You got to understand your social media, all your competitors, like what's going on. It's like we're all just getting, like, our job is not just radio anymore. You know what I mean? So I think that's something that we all need to be aware of too. And I am personally trying to educate myself better on how I can better understand these things to better sell them and to make a better multi-platform opportunity for people too. You're looking at me like, oh my God, Rex.
No. I'm thinking about how much anxiety I had getting this call set up because of some Zoom challenges we have within our company. I'll just leave it at that. The reality is things are changing. And if at my age, mid 70s, if I'm not willing to change, then I'd better get out. If I love it as much as I say I do, then I need to figure out how this digital stuff works better, why it's good for the customer. And you're absolutely right. Knowing where it is that you're headed and then continually working to improve that. The other thing I would like to pass along is that those of you that think that you can, through a text message or an email, put a really good solid presentation together without going face to face or without having a relationship, your closing ratios have got to drop to single digits.
Yeah.
It is about trust, it's about transparency, and it's about knowing what your product is and how it can help your customer. Because we're in the solutions game, and as long as we're in ag broadcasting, we're here feeding the world. I think we have a long-standing career in front of us.
I do too. I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. What about, I mean, everyone probably has a different process even between you and I, but what about the things that we, not just what we bring to that first meeting, but back when I started, I mean, I remember like my boss giving me like just this one sheeter and he's like, okay, here's the questions that you have to ask every client when you go into a new call. And it was like the whole client needs analysis. And it was literally like, you could take it and fill it in and ultimately you just memorized it. So you didn't even have to bring the form in with you anymore. But do you have a certain amount of, or a certain kind of questions that are in your back pocket that you ask on every call, or is that kind of evolved over the years to how you plan for that first meeting?
Yes, the reality is you need to have a foregone drill down on the client before you begin the question process. Because if you walk in with a list of questions 1 through 25, Mr. Customer, can I ask you a few questions and you're reading off the script? It's like, why don't you just pack up your bags and leave?
Right.
Whereas you walk in and you've gotten their attention through a Starbucks card or a purse puppy, all of a sudden you have a conversation going. And there isn't a client that I've called on or an agency that I've been in front of that doesn't have issues. And especially today, COVID, think of it as what we want, which I hate it, has given us a new environment in which to figure out how to get more creative and help these people that we're talking with.
Right. That's kind of what I was thinking too. I mean, I would never walk in now and do that, but back in, the 80s or early 90s, and I was 22 years old, they didn't really have training back then. I mean, that's just kind of what we did. They'd be like, leave the office and come back at 4:45 and recap your day kind of thing. So yeah, I would say.
Was it true you were running around on roller skates at that time?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. See, and that's what
Speaking
I
of
did.
roller skates, I'm a mean roller skater.
Yeah.
I break a leg now. Were roller skates even invented when you started doing the sales calls?
Oh, we had the clip-ons.
Oh my God, sorry. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Next question.
Yeah.
It's your turn.
Oh. I just was thinking about those clip-on roller skates. No, and I'm just thinking too, definitely trying to be as creative as you can too. And I think locally I don't do this too often anymore. I do, but there's a lot of creativity that's involved with not just, creating that schedule that's going to make sense for them. But do you do a lot of writing commercials still?
Still, absolutely.
Okay.
And if knowing ahead of time, if you've got even a glimpse as to what their challenges are, you can go to them with that spec tape. And where did you come up with that? Well, I did a little bit of research and this is what we found, and blah, 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 blah. The thing that I would let people go over is taking the one sheeter and throwing it on the customer's desk and saying, do you want some? I mean, nobody does.
Right. I would agree with that. And I think to your point about, the being creative and having, a spec spot to get in or a demo, whatever, we kind of have used different words over the years. I think that can be really powerful on local calls. And as long as I think you've done it properly and done your homework, it can be an effective tool. But even once further down in the process, when you've agreed to, with the client and they're, yes, they'd like to advertise with you, how do you go about writing a compelling commercial?
Well, I try and find out ahead of time a handful of nuggets that they're tied to problems that they have, solutions that they need, and then work those back into the commercial.
Okay.
And today's world, recruitment and retention is a big part of most businesses.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like I said, I don't do too much of that anymore. But when I do, I feel like it's difficult to do that. I feel like so. Sometimes I think it's good to kind of brainstorm with people too, to get other ideas and collaborate if you've got other people in the office too. It's something that I do.
I just think we ought to let whoever's viewing this know that if they have a question or if they'd like to go one-on-one, I personally be more than happy to do that.
But we just wanted to say thank you to our sponsors, Poet, for sponsoring this sales call event.
Thanks, Breck. Thanks, Bill. And thanks to everyone watching today. This professional improvement session has been brought to you by Poet. Thank you for your support of our members and convention. Have a great day.